All right, all right, all right. So we've spoken about this off camera already. Considering the fact that there seems to be a crisis facing education, when I say that, I'm referring mostly to the students in this country in the U.S. public education system. As an educator yourself, do you believe that that is exaggerated or there's more to be said on this?
I would say it's there is more to be said. I mean, it's not. I mean, it is clearly an issue with what you mentioned earlier off camera that like a higher percentage of students is reading below grade level. Meanwhile, in European countries, they know multiple languages, and Canada they speak French, and English. Which we have kids who could do that here, but they're mostly, of course, sons and daughters of immigrants, of course. I would say it's gotten worse, and of course technology and media, which we've also talked about off camera, might have a lot to do with it.
Mm.
But it comes down to for parents. I mean, parents in America, they control the education system. Parents in America, they have they vote for members of the school board. They have all the power in the world to kind of control the education system around them.
Okay.
But it starts with prioritize reading to their children, making sure they're reading books at home instead of going on YouTube and looking up,
Yeah,
knows what.
becoming masters of Fortnite and TikTok,
Yeah,
as
right.
opposed to
Yeah.
being familiar with literature. Yeah, man, that's really interesting. Because there's a lot of people who want to ascribe the issue to a myriad of people and things. Like I've heard some people say that the COVID pandemic has a lot to do with so many students being behind, which it probably does. And then obviously people are gonna be apt to blame the government or the education system itself. And then there's people who want to blame teachers. And ultimately, I think I agree with you that it ultimately it boils down to the parents, So,
Yeah.
and the reason that is because even if the education system itself is to blame, ultimately the parents have been complicit and tolerant of what is clearly detrimental to their children,
Mm-hmm.
right? And like you said, it's like, well, what are these parents doing at home? Are most parents really reading with their kids at home? Are they really stressing the importance of literacy and education? Are they really sitting down with their kids to make sure they know their times tables, that they can perform basic arithmetic? Are they doing those things? And I think the clear answer is no. And that stems from a cultural problem, like a culture of people who don't value education as something in itself, as
And
something valuable in itself.
I like how you use the word complicit.
Complicity.
Complicit, that's a great word to use because, a lot of parents, have or some parents, not all, of course, have an issue with graphic novels being read in school. Reading, Jane Eyre instead of reading, of course, like,
Rudyard Kipling, Mark Twain.
yeah, you're right.
Yeah.
Reading, you have to read more of those types of books. But of course, you would know that if you actually took an interest in what your child was reading. But
Mm.
they didn't take an interest because it's coming to light now. But 10 years ago, parents didn't care what their kids were reading in school. They got home, they were tired from work, which that's understandable.
Right.
Because you think about it, you worked a 8 to 5 job, you're gonna get tired, and when your kids come home, you're not gonna ask them about their day or what they read.
You just made a very valid point there. So that sort of indicates that we have also another problem which sort of compounds this pre-existing problem, which is people are working so much that they don't have time to devote to the things that actually matter.
Mm.
It's like we have become complicit with a system that subordinates education to careerism, and we focus more on a career that provides us income so that we can supposedly live a better life. But what good is that income when it doesn't allow you to buy what money can't buy? Education. It can't buy you more time to spend with your kids.
Right.
It can't buy you more time to educate your kids. And I think so many people have been, quite frankly, this probably seems a bit hyperbolic, but they have been deluded. They have been made delusional by this idea that, well, you just follow the recipe of going to school, studying, working hard, graduate, go to college, study, work hard, get a good job, make a lot of money, and then all your problems will will be fixed, and it's just not that simple.
Yeah, and
It's
you said that it's careerism that we're prioritizing, and
yeah,
a lot of people will blame the YouTubes, the TV shows, but truthfully, that's being taught in home.
absolutely.
When you're going to work, yeah,
That's the education that our children are receiving when they go home. They are being taught that it's okay to sit down for 5, 6, 7, 8 hours a day behind a TV, behind a phone screen. Something else that we mentioned off camera was a lot of these kids, before they can even form a complete sentence, are being handed cell phones.
mm-hmm.
It's like, it should not surprise us that most eighth graders are reading below their grade level. It should not
Yeah,
surprise us. And I also mentioned earlier, I'm willing to entertain the idea that the younger generations obviously have been exposed to and immersed in technology more than any other generation in history.
right.
And this is largely to blame for their deficiency in a lot of subjects in education, in their educational development and progress. Because that's another thing that people often, in my opinion, sort of undermention or understate the importance of, is that children are in a very critical stage of development while they're being educated between the ages of, I don't know, 5 and 18 into their adolescence, their late adolescence, right? And once they get past that window, there's really not a lot that you can do to get them, quote, caught up, you know? And I think that, you mentioned this earlier, this idea that we pass students along, no student left behind, and we content ourselves with this idea until, well, all of a sudden, once they start failing at a higher grade level and, crap hits the fan, there's no more that you can do to get them, quote, caught up.
Right,
It's like
right.
we've set them up for failure.
Like you just mentioned, we're setting it up for failure. I also talked about how the ninth grade principal at the high school, that the kids were going to the high school to tour the new facilities, all these great educational opportunities. The ninth grade principal was like, "Yeah, you guys could have failed in the seventh grade, but once you get here, you can't fail anymore." And I'm like, why are we teaching them this when they're 14 and 15, that they will fail?
Yeah.
They need to learn that they will fail, and that reading is important at 8 years old.
Yeah, absolutely.
And not 18.
Right. It seems counterintuitive to condition them to think that it's okay to fail. Like you'll succeed either way. Like you don't really have to try. You don't have to put any effort in. But then once they get to high school, like you said, it's like, well, then we flip the script on them, and then by that point, it's too late because you've conditioned them to be failures, and you've set them up for failure. Even not just in an academic sense, but even later in life, And dude, that's really unfortunate.
Yeah, and technology. You mentioned technology and media contributing to, education being like students not being as well educated as they should be, because they're not going home and reading books. They're focusing more on a screen. Now we have the government having to intervene to like ban companies like TikTok, right?
Oh yeah.
And that makes me think, like 150 million users using TikTok is apparently a national security risk when it could just be stopped by the parent.
Absolutely.
Because they are the kings of their own domain.
Yeah.
They really are. They rule their houses, but the truth is they are kind of seen as incapable.
They're seen as incompetent, like they aren't capable of making the decisions that are in the best interest of not only them but even their children, and in a broader sense, society as a whole. And what I think it boils down to, when you look at TikTok, just for example, what value does TikTok bring to people? It brings them entertainment. It brings them stimulation in the form of media.
Endorphins, yeah.
Endorphins, right? We value that. What this says to me is that we value that more than we value the cognitive and intellectual health of our children. Like, because we have, again, become so complicit, so tolerant, so okay with, we've smoothed it over. We've said, well, look, at the end of the day, this is what makes little Timmy happy. This is what keeps him entertained. This is what keeps him occupied, right? And it even applies to a lot of kids in this country who are, quite frankly, addicts to video games, and a whole host of other forms of media entertainment. we've contented ourselves, and we've normalized it to the point to where nobody even thinks it's a problem anymore. And so when people start to reap what we have sown, when we start reaping what we've sown, we want to cry out for help, and that help comes from the big brother or the government. We want to divert responsibility away from ourselves and put it into the hands of a government who supposedly knows better than we do. And this, in my opinion, undermines the very premise of democracy. It is ultimately the people who should be responsible for holding their institutions, academic, educational, governmental, legal, etc.,
But you know,
accountable.
it was Benjamin Franklin that said, "Those who would sacrifice freedom for safety deserve neither freedom or safety."
Yeah,
And
very good quote.
and people are willing to kind of sacrifice, you know, companies' rights to exist, or banning this product or banning this, so their kids could be safer. Meanwhile, they could just take the steps to prevent it from happening in the first place.
Absolutely.
Kind of like when you give a kid a cell phone and they talk to perverts online. You could stop it right then and there. There are apps that go out of their way to stop your child from interacting with adults they shouldn't interact with, or better yet, once they get home, they have to put their phone away. They can't have a phone while they're home, because there's no need. They're already home. They don't need to call or text anyone because they're 15, right?
Yeah.
And so I think our society is moving in the direction of more government control over families, and we kind of deserve that, you know, because you know we have shown that we are not capable, you know, and
Yeah. I mean, at the end of the day, it's almost like this is merely the consequence of what we have allowed. It's almost like we asked for it.
we asked for it.
We literally asked for it.
Mm-hmm.
And the sad thing is that I think most people, when they hear or are involved and engaged in a conversation like this, they can clearly see what is necessary. They can clearly see what is right and what is wrong, like what we should do. But it all boils down to, are we going to assume responsibility and accountability for these supposed problems we have on our plate?
Yeah.
You know, what are we going to do? And kind of backtracking a little bit to what we talked about earlier, there's a lot of people in this country, namely parents, who are working so hard just to live paycheck to paycheck. And like you said, once they get off work, they're too tired. They're too tired to worry about their kids, whether their kids are competent in a range of subjects, right? To sit down with them and mentor and educate them and ensure that they're not being pushed through the system and left behind, in the sense that they're just not up to par. They're not performing on the level that they should, you know, in their development, their educational development. And so it's a vicious cycle. It's like those same kids who grow up in that sort of household are going to become those same sorts of parents who are even more complicit, more tolerant of a way of life, a culture, a system, which is just not conducive to our freedom and our health, our ultimate well-being, you know?
Yeah, and when you say not conducive to our health and overall well-being, there's nothing about the education system or work in America that screams healthy. I mean, think about it.
Oh yeah, man, it's extremely unhealthy.
You sit inside all day with these bright LED lights glaring down on you. You're not getting any vitamin D during the day. You are not doing any physical health exercise, which physical health and exercise are linked to your mental cognitive abilities as a human being. And you know, that's not only what adults have to deal with, but that's what children have to deal with. They are at school from 8 to perhaps even 5 p.m. if they do a sport, which thank God they do a sport because they can actually work out and be healthy. But you know, a vast majority of children, they don't work out. They go home at the end of the day, eat Cheetos.
So we're becoming more and more sedentary, and that is just yet another factor which compounds this problem even more. Is we become more conditioned to live sedentary lifestyles, and of course, a lot of the work, especially high-paying jobs, require you to be sedentary, like an office job, for example.
Right.
Requires you to be sedentary, live a sedentary lifestyle, which, of course, heightens your risk of developing certain health problems associated with that, associated with a lack of exercise, a lack of mobility and flexibility, right?
Which I don't think sedentary lifestyles would be a thing if if there was actually a purpose behind the education, a purpose behind the work, you know, if you're a guy who organizes paperwork for like a farming company, you could see the longevity of the business. Like, oh, I'm providing essential food to people abroad or in America. And if you're in the, or let's say you're in a history class, you're not learning just blatant facts, but you're also learning about different philosophical principles, different reasons why war was caused. You're actually learning some real tangible stuff that
Yeah.
actually happened that you could kind of relate to in this modern age.
Absolutely.
And but the fact is that work nowadays you're expecting it to be mundane. You're expecting it to be boring, and
What it all boils down to me is that our curriculums are not designed to generate self-sufficient, self-reliant, independent people.
no,
It's
no,
it's designed to make people functionaries in an economic machine.
yes,
Functionaries, who apparently are expected to live paycheck to paycheck and be up to their eyeballs in debt for the rest of their lives, and ultimately crying out to some political messiahs to solve their problems. You know, because we ourselves, we the people, again, we became complicit. We became complacent. We became tolerant of things that totally undermine our health, our well-being, and the perpetuity of our democracy. So,
and truthfully, do you know what should be taught before STEM? Because when I think of science, technology, engineering, and math, that is very important, and you need it.
absolutely.
But when you think about it, you need kind of the what I'm called basic STEM. You need to have simple agriculture techniques that the students need to learn, like agriculture and farming. They need to learn how to how to make blueberries. You know that you could plant blueberries in your backyard, but people don't know that. You could plant carrots in your back park, but people don't know that.
A lot of people don't even know how to grow their own food.
Yeah,
Like that's one of the things that should be essential learning. It's like
simple science stuff.
simple.
Yeah.
Yeah, very simple. Yeah, I agree with you. I think that the sort of science, if we will call it science, that is practical, which actually contributes to self-sufficiency and self-reliance.
Mm-hmm.
Those are the things that actually help people to live an independent, fulfilled life in which they're not having to focus so much on acquiring income just so that they can be cogs in this economic machine that relies so heavily on consumerism. That's another thing, is we condition people to believe that, well, if you go to school, work hard to earn a lot of money, and you eventually earn money, you can have more money to consume things which make you happy. This is a very, very dangerous.
It's a slippery slope too.
It's a slippery slope. It's a very dangerous recipe that ultimately contributes to our ultimate downfall.
Because you'll do anything for money. Like it's kind of like you're waving a dollar bill and you know, at a strip club. I mean, that's what it is, and you'll do anything for the dollar. And
well, I've steadily, I mean, over the course of my very short life, our very short lives, because we're around the same age, I've seen how people have just become they've become so content with this idea that any problem can be solved by throwing money at it. It doesn't matter if it's a political problem, a social issue, a personal problem. They think that if you just have enough money and you can throw money at the problem, that'll solve the problem. And quite frankly, things just aren't that simple, you know.
like when you pipes broke, plumber. No food tonight. Slim's Chicken, right? You know?
yeah. It conditions us to, again, it conditions us to be less self-reliant. It's like you have more of an incentive to outsource any and every function of your life until eventually you're helpless, and the only thing you can rely on is the very money that you use to buy your contentment, your satisfaction, your own utility, basically.
So you're like a slave to your services.
You're a slave to money.
Slave to money.
That's the easiest way to put it. And this could easily devolve into a discussion of our money system or our monetary system in this country, but for the sake of keeping this video within a relatively small scope, I would like to not get too deep into that.
Oh, that would be
today.
another time though, but very important.
Absolutely,
though.
absolutely. But yeah, man, I just I don't know. I
But you know what I was getting at is that maybe students would be willing to learn about, like, you know, your calculuses, maybe about your biologies, maybe about your chemistry, if they, you know, if they learned like some actual applicable skills. Like in carpentry, you have to learn a lot of math. There's a
yeah.
lot of math involved with a lot of angles, measuring tapes, and
But
you know,
within the context of carpentry, it makes sense and it's applicable. And a student who understands how something theoretical can actually be applied in the real world is much more likely to be engaged
mm.
and excited about learning that.
But it
You
seems
know.
like we're skipping over that just to like, okay, yeah, these are all jobs that are available. I'm just gonna teach you all the facts that go with it,
Yeah, yeah,
and
exactly. It's like education has become a process of just dumping information into people's brain.
yeah.
Indoctrination in many ways.
And guess what? If that information is not applicable, it becomes useless information.
Mm.
It does. It's not. It,
Well,
like,
then
why don't care about the Greek Latin words of the biology that we learned? We remember you had to learn Latin Greek words, and I'm like, why would I ever need to learn that? And the truth is, I mean, I'm more interested in learning about Latin now, but you know, a lot
yeah,
of our vocabulary comes from that. But you know, back when I was in 10th grade, I could care less.
yeah,
I could care
yeah.
less. Yeah.
Absolutely, because and the reason that you could care less is because at the time you couldn't really see the value in it.
Yeah.
Like, but that's the thing. This quickly devolves into a philosophical discussion of value, right? So, you know, the way that we perceive value most often today within the context of our society and culture is, again, like I've been saying numerous times, money.
Money.
Like
Yeah.
how is this gonna make how is this gonna help me make more money? How's this gonna help me make a quick buck? That's what we're thinking. And the danger behind this is that it causes us to think too much in the short term, and it also causes us to be a little too narrow minded. Another aspect of education which I think should get way more focus, especially nowadays, seeing as in your opinion and in the opinion of many people I've spoken to, children are becoming less and less creative. I think we should concentrate a whole lot more on the arts, the liberal arts and the humanities. Children should be um, they should become more immersed in those subjects because ultimately those are the subjects that help you to be cultured. They help you to form a deep, well-rounded understanding of the human condition. And you're a social studies teacher, so I know you'll appreciate the patterns of history, the patterns of civilizations and societies, the problems that we face, the ideas that we have, the beliefs that shape and necessitate the situations and outcomes that we must all inevitably reckon with.
And but you know, you can't monetize the humanities as well.
Exactly. Like
Yeah.
it's very those are ironically those are the most valuable subjects because you can't really put a price on them. They're priceless. It's like those are the subjects which quite literally account for the rise and fall of civilizations.
And if you think about it, what is something that our founding fathers and truthfully our ancestors held most dear? The Bible. That
Hmm.
is that is considered like one of the quintessential humanity pieces, right? Because it's
Yeah.
one, it's philosophical, two, it's spiritual, and three, it's historical. You know,
Absolutely.
it
It's
checks off every box.
the Bible. Yeah, the Bible is the single most important work of literature in the Western world.
But
Period.
we claim it
In the
is,
world.
but we don't prioritize its teaching. We don't want to learn about it because you know it is kind of politicized a little bit. But I always think that, man, if people would understand, like, all the Abrahamic people need to understand the Abrahamic religions for one. People need to know all the Greek philosophers for two, and people maybe need to learn also the military strategists. I
Mm.
think those three, um, if those all three were learned in humanities, I think a lot of people would one day see how there's a modern application to all those, one of those philosophical principles, those biblical principles, and also how those military strategies have kind of evolved in to the way that now that's how countries use modern diplomacy, you
Mm-hmm.
know, and you kind of see how, like, maybe how Sun Tzu and Confucius, or how Confucianism has kind of made modern China the way it is.
Mm-hmm.
You know, people really underestimate humanities because they they don't see that. Guess what? Those beliefs really did shape modern China. Those beliefs in Europe and Western Europe and in Greece really did influence how America is today.
Yeah, absolutely.
You know,
Those are our cultural roots. Those are the roots of civilizations. And so that's what I meant earlier when I said they account for the rise and fall of civilizations. Is, in order to understand a civilization, you have to understand its roots. And the civilizations of today, modern societies, are rooted in a very rich, robust, sophisticated, and complex past. One that is not easily understood, one that takes a lifetime to really grasp and reckon with.
Right. And even a lifetime is never going to be enough, dude.
Oh yeah, yeah. I mean, yeah. Even so, that's why education within the context of a school environment or an academy is so important. It's because like multiple people who are surrounded by each other, who is being instructed and learning alongside each other, are exchanging ideas, are learning, are talking and discussing things. But and that's another thing is our society, not just, well, I'm not an educator, so I don't know this. I'm not a school teacher, but I do know in the public sector or even in the private sector with working at a professional environment, in a professional environment, people are becoming less skilled at socializing. Because, yeah, because we've become so immersed in, again, technology and media. We've become so dependent on it, and so it's not uncommon to walk into a waiting room at a medical office or at a hospital and to see like literally dozens of people staring at their cell phones, not talking to each other, not interacting, not exchanging ideas, not having conversations, not getting to know each other, not forming personal bonds.
Which, if you think about it, we're kind of a part of that generation that has our cell phones. Like, I still have social media, and
absolutely,
and there is an addictive quality about that.
Absolutely.
But it's like you don't know what you haven't seen before. Like, we'd never interacted in the society where people got on elevators to have small talk. We didn't really interact. We didn't grow up when people would literally see the old lady in the grocery store to take her groceries to her car. So I mean, even though you kind of instinctively know that's right, to a certain degree, you haven't seen it happen.
Right. And so like that's not our normal.
No, it's not
our normal anymore. Yeah, we've normalized something different, something which really in the long run is only furthering a wedge between us. Like what is the consequence of people not talking to each other? Like they feel more and more alienated from each other,
Right. Because if we're Americans and we live in this country, and because the thing is, being an American, it's a vague word to use nowadays, but we have these basic principles that we believe in, like the Constitution and rights for self-determination, all these other these big facts here. But another fact that has existed a long time is the camaraderie. Like, okay, if we are at war, we try to help each other out. We don't use rubber. We collect scrap metal, or we try to do victory gardens so our soldiers across the sea could have the right amount of food to eat.
Right.
And but nowadays it's like we see a fellow American on the street. That doesn't mean anything. That means very little.
Many of the things that you just mentioned were features of what many historians call the greatest generation, quote, the greatest generation in America, that World War II generation.
Ooh,
that generation which made immense sacrifices both at home and abroad to ensure victory over tyrants,
right?
Political tyrants.
But there's controversy because the greatest generation, they were before the civil rights era, so they must have had
every people has their flaws. We all have their flaws. It's not to say that they were perfect, but
they had a sense of we fight and we stick together that I kind of like. It's like, man, I want to bring that culture aspect today.
Yeah,
where like being an American, it means something. Like it means that we kind of look at ourselves a little better than Canadians. We look better at we kind of have a bit of a chip on our shoulder, but not to the point where we hate other people.
Yeah.
But to the point where we kind of see like society is kind of an extension of our family.
Yeah.
We have family, but then again, we see maybe El Dorado, we see Magnolia as like maybe still like, something more, like whether it be brothers in Christ, whether it would be fellow Americans, but
There needs to be a village mentality.
the village
A
mentality.
village mentality, and that's something that we really lack. And it seems like the course that we're on a course to lack that even more, to become even more deficient in that. And one of the features of 21st century America is that we are deeply segregated, divided. We have no solidarity whatsoever. I mean, we're segregated across all lines. Like, people are constantly, willingly, enthusiastically trying to point out how different they are from someone else, politically,
Mm-hmm.
racially, ethnically, nationally, socially, economically. It's like any and every feature of a person's attributes and characteristics that you can think of is grounds for segregation. And this is not conducive to a society
And
which,
I think it's in more ways than we think, Gio, because you mentioned that we're the segregation of the races, but I want to mention like the segregation of the sexes.
oh yeah, that's, I forgot about I forgot the war between men and women right now.
Oh yeah, and
Yeah.
because before, I would say in the 1980 or 1970s, you could go up to a girl and maybe propose the idea of taking her on a date.
You say that like you were there.
Well, I'm assuming, right?
I'm just kidding.
I mean, wouldn't that?
I mean, yeah, based on what people I'm sure we've both talked to have said, the dating scheme, for example, was much different, like you said. So yeah.
But I've heard stories of like, well, you meet a girl in church and you ask her. Well, you probably still could do that today, but I'm talking about in general. You talk to a girl. You more or less do that online, right? You do that on Snapchat. You do that on Instagram.
Yeah. That's one of the most unfortunate features of modern dating.
Right. And have you noticed that when you talk to a girl like in public, in a public place, they kind of look at you kind of weird a little bit nowadays?
Oh yeah.
And I don't think it's the girl's fault. I think it's it comes back to what we were talking about in the end. We want self gratification because because in the girl's mind you want sex. You want something that's selfish, like how the education system only leads you to want money and stuff like that.
It's just for self gratifying reasons, and
Yeah.
we don't see the value to our fellow man,
Right.
the value that we can contribute to our fellow man.
Yeah, because the sex value before was you got to make a family. That was
Right.
considered the value of it.
Oh yeah, but now we have a culture that sexually objectifies women.
Right, objectifying women, and so they kind of have a right to be a little standoffish when they get approached to a guy because they think, oh, they do want sex, and nine times out of 10 they are right. They are right.
Right.
And but it can, but before then, a guy would want to have sex with a woman for the idea of for the consequence of having to provide for her and providing with the children that he would have with her.
Right.
And
with that came an obligation or responsibility.
right.
And it's like kind of harkening back to what we mentioned earlier. People are being more and more conditioned to just divert responsibility away from themselves and onto the government, or really just on anyone, but in most cases the government, because supposedly our political messiahs know better how to manage and oversee our lives than we do. Like, that's the attitude, that is the culture that we have conformed ourselves to and we've become complicit with. And it's something that is not, it's something which is going to lead to a very bleak future, in my opinion. One final remark, and then we can conclude this session. In your opinion, what can, to our audience who's tuned into this, what can parents or even people who aren't parents, what, in your opinion, what do you think they can do to help this situation, this education crisis that we have in this country? What should they do?
So, if I'm going to be honest, I don't think there's a lot you could do in terms of changing the education system like 100%. Like, there's nothing you could do as the individual parent because it's going to need to be a collective push. But I would say that what you could do at home is you could start teaching the things that they don't teach in school, and that goes with if your kid doesn't know how to read, start with that. Start where you're at. It's like come as you are, right?
Yeah.
Come as you
Yeah.
are. You will come with what the kid already knows. For instance, maybe if the kid takes band at school, they don't need to learn an instrument, but learning instrument is very valuable. But so maybe do that if they're not in band. If your student has a firm grasp on reality and is interested in the humanities, maybe you don't have to go into detail about that either, because some kids just genuinely like reading books about Gone with the Wind and learning more about the different perspective of why the South did what they did, but others don't. So maybe you're gonna have to, So I would say tailor it to your kid.
Absolutely.
Tailor what your kid doesn't know to what doesn't know already, because sometimes some parents have already started showing their kid Veggie Tales and learning them and teaching them biblical principles at a very young age. So maybe by the time they're 14 or 15, keep teaching it, but you might not have to teach it as much as other kids need to learn that sort of stuff. So
Yeah.
you could probably talk more about your Aristotles and your Greek philosophers, because the truth is, even in education, it's not a one-size-fit-all. You have 30 kids in a classroom learning under one teacher. He or she is never, ever, ever going to be able to tailor the education experience exactly how the student needs it.
Yeah.
Even with the differentiation, some students are already going to know what it is. Some students will not have any clue what they're talking about because they can't read or do basic stuff. And so the education system just needs to be tailored. Because if you think about it, schools back in 1850s and 1880s and whatnot were one-room classrooms, right? They were smaller, and you could probably have more of an intimate experience with education. But nowadays, that's just not a fact.
So
Reality.
what I'm gathering from everything you said is that there needs to be more intimacy in education. There needs to be more personability in education.
But who can be the most intimate with
The
the child?
parents.
Exactly.
The parents. So the
Mhm.
bottom line, the answer, the solution, if we can put it that way. I don't even like using those words because of what they connote. But the action item that we should all strive to take is, if we are around children, especially if we have our own children, we need to take as much time as we can to ask them about education, to talk to them about education, the importance of it, literacy, and taking up time with them to identify and assess any shortcomings or deficiencies they may have, and taking action to make sure they get the help that they need.
Yeah, because I have one coach. He says he asked his daughter. She's a sweet girl. He's a good guy too. He's like, I asked her how school was, and she said, I don't know. And I think that's a good start. Asking her about their day. That's a good
Like,
start.
what'd you learn today? What'd you learn at school today?
But then again, that's too broad. It's if you as a parent are gonna have to know the curriculum to a certain degree, and I know that's very difficult because maybe you didn't pay a lot of attention in school, or maybe you're very busy with work. But you could maybe you could go on the Arkansas Department of Education. They have the standards for each subject, and maybe if you maybe don't harass the teacher. Trust me, I'm a teacher. I don't like to be harassed. But if
I
you're,
can imagine.
yeah, I like my free time. But if you go to the standards, you can learn what your student should be learning about, and maybe give them broad questions. So tell me, were you interested in learning about the Civil War? And you were like, no, not really. Yeah, I kind of enjoyed it. Or like as a guy, yeah, of course, that was my favorite thing I learned about in his class. Maybe you could ask them what they know, or if it's I'd say maybe if you don't care much about like learning about facts about history, talk about English. Like do you know how to what's a verb? What is a noun?
Basic stuff, but essential stuff.
Essential stuff.
Essential
Yeah.
stuff.
And
Like,
yeah.
there's no reason that a young person should graduate high school in this country not having a good bearing, a good grasp of the fundamentals and essentials that they'll need to navigate life and to live a good quality of life.
Right. And if you remember, I don't know if you had Coach Laval in high school.
The name sounds familiar. I don't know if I had him.
But he taught how to change a tire.
Yeah. I mean, those are the sorts of things like a lot of kids. You'd be surprised how many kids are never taught that by their parents either.
Right. And so I'm like, that's a check mark for the school district. That's a good thing you taught us that. So it's not like school is completely terrible, but it doesn't mean that there isn't room for improvement either.
Absolutely.